Welcome, everybody, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the best stories in college football. We have a special Selection Sunday episode right now. Rudy, let's immediately get into it. The committee has spoken. We have our 12 teams. What are your first thoughts before we get into what you thought would happen / should have happened and into our predictions? That's how we'll organize this show. First, what are your immediate first thoughts?
I hate the selection show, and I hate the way that they try to just create the outrage before it happens. And yeah, do I think that? What do I think about the 12 teams? Look, at a certain point there, I was really scared that they were going to put in 8 teams between the Big Ten and the SEC, and the
Yeah.
fact that that didn't happen felt kind of good, but at the same time, the process still sucks. The lack of having a rubric still sucks. The entire way that they put this on still kind of sucks. So I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, I felt like when first, the old saying, they say misery loves company, and it couldn't be more true. So, congratulations, Alabama. You are the first ones out with us. So, congratulations on enjoying your mediocre bowl with us in this offseason. That was the first thing that made me happy. Super, super happy that the committee picked two ACC teams. We can actually, after this, get into yesterday's games, kind of talking about, and we'll include Fridays too as well, what we thought and how they came to this conclusion. But um, it's again, you know us, we love tinfoil hat theories. Next season we definitely have to come up with like a logo or like an actual. I'm gonna have to build an actual tinfoil hat to put it on my head. Um, but I definitely thought it was very convenient that the dominoes fell or the chips fell where they did, because it just so happens that the SEC got their teams in, the Big Ten got their teams in, everyone's happy. And I think that they did the 50-50 split with the SEC and the Big Ten getting their home games, with obviously Notre Dame getting what they deserve. We'll take a look right now. As you can see, Oregon, ranked number one, gets the bye. Georgia's SEC champion gets the second bye. Third bye goes to the Boise State Broncos, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, for some. And then the last bye goes to Arizona State, with Clemson clinching the 12 spot as a ACC champion. What were some of the things that you thought they should have done, Rudy, looking at the bracket? How would you have reorganized this?
This is what's tough because if you look at how it worked out, I think looking at what they were already operating with over the course of the season, I think they were as consistent as they could have been. I'm more of a critic of how the entire season played out because it shows how all of the narratives only help and benefit the SEC and the Big Ten. So I think in what they did, I think they gave Boise a little bit of a gift at being the number 3 overall team. I understand why they put Clemson as one of the teams that's going on the road that won the conference as a 3-loss team. The only reason they're in is because they won the ACC championship game, and what is the circle of suck completing itself regardless of divisions. And I just think it showed how little the ACC is thought of by the selection committee by having Clemson being what in their rankings, they were like 16, but because they had won the conference championship, that's their
Yeah.
automatic bid in. And at that point, when you saw that, the drama already started happening of saying, are they really going to leave SMU out for doing that? It was
Yeah.
it was really pointing as if that was going to happen, and you would have had 4 SEC teams. And what I would argue, and I don't think there's much resistance to it, is this is the weakest the SEC has looked since at least 2006, 2005. It's probably the worst the SEC has looked since then. So we're talking about almost 20 years, and
Yeah.
they still got 3 bids.
I thought looking at this was almost exactly the way I almost probably would have had it. Again, I knew they were going to give Ohio State the home field advantage. I also knew they were going to give obviously the SEC loser and the Big Ten loser, leaving only Notre Dame, who, and I think in the AP they were ranked number three. Um, and so I knew they would get the home games. So I kind of suspected that. I think the reason why they put Clemson, and I not that I agree with it, because I mean I do believe the top four teams which should have been the Power Four teams. I mean, Boise State, yes, they had a great game against Oregon, but I still think again we talked about this also in our um, preview that experience sometimes will win out, and sure enough, it did in the SEC and the ACC. You saw Georgia; they were able to handle them, which to me, I guess we can kind of get into it before we get into our predictions for what will happen. But it's like I don't know how you can win with a backup quarterback like that, other than just the experience. It's maybe like an out coach thing. I don't know, but in terms of the playoff, just to stick with it before we move on, I thought it pretty much ended up the way I thought it would. Like I said, really glad SMU was able to stick in and kick Alabama out. I knew that would kind of happen if Clemson did win. I think the reason why I said this is what I kind of thought was happening is I think the committee knew SMU wasn't up to par and their arms were tied if Clemson did win because it's like you had a dominant showing by Arizona State against Iowa State and you had Boise State in a dominant showing against UNLV. Both were top 25 teams. And so it's like, okay, well, they've got better records than Clemson. How do you put them in, right? That ACC prestige wasn't going to keep Clemson in the game. So with that said, I thought with Clemson eking out a victory, that is basically why they got left that 12 seed. It'll be interesting to see. I think it provides a better matchup. I think a Clemson versus Texas is way better than a Boise State versus Texas. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, the one thing that you could say about Clemson with that win is that there's a possibility that this could have been the motivation they needed to look more like Clemson that we're used to seeing these past couple of years. I don't know
Yeah.
how much that's still going to be the case. I think the other thing that you mentioned too is if they were to leave SMU out, you've eliminated conference championship games.
Oh,
Dr. Pepper will be
absolutely.
very mad at you.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
even be surprised if the ACC and the Big 12 would have just said if they would have if SMU would have been left out, I think they would have just been like, okay, cool. We just won't have championship games anymore. There's no need. We'll just crown a champion by best of record and declare it based on ties and go from there, because what's the advantage? And it's so funny. There's so many different talking points and perspectives of what needs to be corrected. It was really funny watching Nick Saban have a conniption in his own
Oh,
way, obviously, on the selection board with Alabama not getting picked and,
it was
him
so
complaining about
cringy.
strength of schedule and X, Y, and Z. And it's utterly nauseating at this point. Like, I respect the man for what he did, but I mean, if anyone's going to sit there and try and tell you he's a balanced and objective, journalist, that's ridiculous.
No.
I think he still resides in Tuscaloosa. He has a what's the word I'm looking for? Uh he has a
He,
connection to
he has an ongoing
Alabama.
relationship.
Yeah, and
Yep.
he needs it. It serves his best interest to root for Alabama. Um I think it was Dono was making a point which I thought would have been a better thing. It's like we'll move now to like the games and kind of like what the bowl should have been. I think it would have been with the two teams out. I think there should be a bowl. Like
100%, just like last year. Florida State
is the
played
peach
Georgia.
is the peach bowl? Yeah, exactly. I mean that should always be. I don't want to call it like an NIT
I
invitational
would call it the NIT, not invited to the
tournament.
playoff.
NITP.
Not invited to playoff, NITP.
NITP. Welcome to the NIT people. NIT people. Because again, that would settle a lot of things. I think that would. I mean, there's the joke we want Bama. Whenever we're doing well, any team's doing well, we want Bama. But I think that would have been a better bowl than what we got. But let's just talk about really quick. Let's talk about championship weekend. Let's start off first with the ACC, just because again, it's our game of choice. It's our conference. What did you think of the game?
I want to jump on one thing real quick about
Yeah,
championship
absolutely.
weekend overall. How funny was it that in the Power Four, you had the same matchup in every single game of somebody brand new to the conference in their
Oh
first
yeah.
year playing, and then somebody who's been there for a long time.
Yeah,
And they
we've been
went 50-50 with
and
that.
it did go 50-50, and we were talking about that on Friday during our show.
Yep.
And again, I had made the point, I think, with both games, with Clemson and with Georgia. I said I had picked the other teams that were in it, but I said don't be surprised if experience wins out, because sometimes it's those moments you can't handle. And I was really surprised with SMU, their defense. And again, I think this is why it's also important to maybe have some intra-conference games, just so you can get a better sampling of each team. And that doesn't go just for ACC teams. This could go for, take for example, a Penn State or
Yep.
an Indiana, or even a Boise. These teams that maybe are doing well, but you're not getting an accurate sampling because they're playing in what's perceived to be a lower or weaker conference. If you can get these mid-year, mid-season matchups going, you can kind of, I think, feel like gauge and get a better result from that. Because again, that was probably, I'm trying to think, probably the best game Clemson played all season.
It absolutely was, and I think
Yeah,
something about that game that was so odd to me, um, SMU finally looked like the team that I think we all thought SMU would be at the beginning of the
yeah,
year in terms of, like, their group of 5, how they would run offensively, like, will they be able to keep up with a team that has a physical defense? I didn't think Clemson had it in them, anymore, or at least this season, to look like that team. They ended up looking, a lot better, as you mentioned. It's their best game of the year, but SMU's defense looked like it did against BYU. They got pushed around. They looked small. SMU's offensive line looked microscopic compared to Clemson's defensive front. And as much as Clemson got bullied around this year by South Carolina and by Louisville, of all teams, and obviously Georgia being a high ranked team, I just thought, if this was the matchup with Miami, maybe SMU doesn't look that way because Miami doesn't really have a defense. They would have looked a little bit stronger, but they felt like they got exposed there.
yeah. And it was funny. I don't know who I was texting this to. Maybe it was you. I think it was you, actually. I was like, this should have been us. Like when I
Yeah.
was watching Clemson win, I was like, this should have been us. Because not to say that like we would have fared the same way Clemson would have, but I feel like we are a more comparable team to complement SMU, and Clemson backdooring their way into the championship, into the playoffs, essentially. But I mean, props to them. I mean, they again, this is why we play the game, right? This is why we play on Saturdays and we don't just use paper stats and things like that. Because like on paper, SMU should have won this game. Their defense statistically was better than what Clemson's offense was producing. And so to me, it was just, I think it was just like one of those things. I think I'm a big proponent that the difference between the NFL and college football is this little thing called momentum. And momentum, when you're in the pros, you kind of learn to shake things off, shake plays off, move on, move forward. But in college football, it is just, and maybe it's just this a thing of convenience that I notice in games. But from the moment that Jennings lost the ball in that first drive, it was, you could just tell there was just something,
Yep.
they weren't clicking like they were to. They had, I think they had like, by the third quarter, they had 5 or 6 drop passes in the by the third quarter, and that's what they had all season.
Yep.
Like all season, they had only had 5 drop passes, and then by the third quarter, they already had 6. And then you can obviously extrapolate that to the rest of the game because there was a few more drops after that. So to me, that signals a mental block, a mental issue that's going on in the game. Because I just feel like when you're again, props to Clemson for winning, but in my opinion, it wasn't like you were playing that much better of a team. It wasn't like you were
Yeah.
playing a Texas or a Georgia or a Ole Miss, if you want to use them, or an Ohio State, right? Let's use some of these top tier programs where you would see SMU trailing that bad, going down that fast, and then having the game go so one way. Because even just the coverage, when you're watching some of these Clemson wide receivers get open, I was just like, how are they just so open? How are they hitting these holes? And how is Cade Klubnik looking this great? Because no
Yep.
offense to him, but I mean, he looked stellar last night. And so it was just very surprising to me to see that. But I am glad to see that. I mean, again, Clemson almost Clemson last night. I mean, I'm watching that third quarter going into the fourth quarter, and I'm like, oh, maybe they'll hold on. And then that fourth quarter came, and you could just, again, another momentum shift, right? You get a stop, you get a score, you get a stop, you drive down the field. And so, for again, you could, by the end of that game, when Randall took that kickoff back the way he did, that's when I knew. I was like, this game's over. There's just
Yep.
they're gonna, and I not because I trusted Clemson's kicker, because Clemson's special teams have been all over the place this season. Not good.
Multiple blocks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not good. But there's just something when you've watched college football long enough, you can just sense when things are just going to go one way, and that immediately I just heard my own voice saying experience will sometimes win out, and it did. And sure enough, it's a perfect story. A team that backdoor their way into the ACC championship with a horrible special teams uses the special teams to get into the playoff, and so
And commit 0 penalties in the process of doing that. Somehow that
miraculous.
team.
And I think the stat on that was the only other time Clemson had ever had a non-penalty game was last year, and the time before that was like 1956. So it was like 50 or 60 years. They've only done it twice. So incredible. But props to Clemson. Wish them the best against Texas. I always will cheer for ACC teams just because as long as we're in it, we need ACC. We need the ACC to look good. Which game would you like to move over to next? SEC, Big Ten. Do you want to do the
Uh,
G5?
uh, Up to you. I mean, I'm happy to go chronological order if you want to go like G5 to
Yeah,
start and go
let's
from
do
there.
chronological order. G5. I thought UNLV. I thought they would put up a much better fight. I was convinced they would, and that was just a one-sided affair. I mean,
Yeah.
there was nothing about it. I was watching that game, and I'm just like, how is Boise? I mean, Boise State. It wasn't like their defense looked amazing. I think it was a combination that they had a good defense or a great defense, and then UNLV was just constantly missing the mark. And that just was like a perfect combination for them to go down by 21 or whatever it was. And they kind of tried to rally back towards the second half, but I mean, it was a very, to me, even though the score wasn't as big of a blowout or that 3 touchdown separation, I thought of it as that. In my mind, I was like, this was a 3 possession game, and Boise State handily beat UNLV twice.
Yeah, and you have a Heisman finalist running back to hand the ball off to kill as much clock as you want. So
Ye-
it's
Yeah, and
just yeah, that's a hard formula to it's a hard pill to swallow for UNLV to try to stay competitive there. It's something that they get the extra rest because they have that bye week going into a quarterfinal game. So let's see how healthy they can get to try to they have what, like the Penn State side of the bracket?
yeah, I think they're going to be playing the winner of Penn State and SMU, which I mean, who knows where that could go? You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because SMU if they're clicking, they can score points like Oregon, like they if not more.
Yeah.
I feel like SMU has a more explosive offense than Oregon does. I think Oregon has a better system wholeheartedly, but in terms of the actual, offense and explosivity, I'm not going to be surprised if SMU gives Penn State a run for their money. So I think that'll be an interesting matchup. Moving over to the Big 12 game, that was a bludgeoning. I mean,
Yep.
that was. I mean, we had faith in Arizona State, but I thought Iowa State would come out fighting a little bit.
I had faith in my boy Scadaboo, and he didn't let me down. He just had himself what
Beast,
he even
beast.
hit the Heisman pose at the end. He's like, "Look, it
Yeah,
might be a little late for that party, but dude, you showed out in that game, and you just
yeah.
the one play where he got like what 40 yards after contact, who just trucks a dude and keeps going, then spins around and still stays up. Like that was just kind of a microcosm of the entire game. It just they can't stop us. They can't stop
No,
us run.
and we talked about that. We were like, Iowa State has one of the worst rush defenses in the nation. And on top of that, you have a team that is their bread and butter, and they just lost their star wide receiver, so they're not going to throw it. And sure enough, I mean, it gives me hope. I mean, it gives me hope because we're going to play them in the Pop Tart Bowl, and I think we have 2 stud running backs if they both end up playing. And we can get most of our team playing. Do you think actually thinking of that? And I know this is kind of going off on a tangent. How many players do you think opt out now that they know they're in the Pop Tart Bowl?
Iowa State or Miami?
Miami.
That's a good question because a few, I mean, obviously the ones who are declaring to go in the portal are obviously opting out of that game.
Right.
In terms of the matchup, I mean, look, this is something that you can argue already. Like Cam Ward's stock is not going to go up playing Iowa State.
Yeah.
So in terms of him, why play in that game? It's one thing to like feel like you have to support your teammates. I understand that, but at this time, young man, worry about the NFL. Worry about getting yourself right for draft stock. You've proven everything. You already are the number one offense in the country. You don't have to go out and show it again.
Yeah.
So, how many players opt out? I don't. If you're the defense, nobody should opt out
Mm.
unless you're in the portal. And if you're offense, like I don't see many of them opting out either. To be honest with you, I think it's just a matter of I mean, you have a couple of receivers who are leaving. Like on the list would be who, like Xavier Restrepo or Jacoby George.
Hmm.
Maybe Jacoby George, but probably not Xavier
Maybe Damien,
Restrepo.
because Damien's going to the draft.
There's rumors that he might actually come back, which I think were
Wait,
absolutely insane. I think
but hold on.
he might.
How does he have a year? I thought he was on his sixth
I
year.
thought he was a one and done. I heard this too, so I'm just going to throw that out
Yeah.
there as saying I think this is shenanigans, just like Dylan Raiola being considered to work at Miami. But I just wanted to
Exactly.
throw it out there to say I don't know how that works out.
I
But
don't either because I thought he was a sixth year senior. So like because he got the COVID year and then the red
yeah,
shirt. So
no
I was
idea.
that would be interesting. Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah,
back to
McCormick's not going to opt out.
oh yeah no he's I mean that guy's gonna play as much football as he possibly can. He's gonna try and beat Dylan Gabriel for most games played. Even
Yep.
though it's possible. But no, back to Arizona State and Iowa State. I just thought that was I mean again how how do you not show up for that game? I mean, I just felt like Iowa State, I'm not sure if it was ill prepared, whether they didn't want it. There's just to get blown out that bad in a championship game, it just doesn't look good for the program. I do wonder how they'll show up for the Pop Tart Bowl, because I stopped watching that halfway through the game. I was just like, okay,
Yeah.
this game's pretty much over because
Yeah.
it wasn't even. I think it was only a two possession game by the time I was done watching it. But you could just tell based on the possessions where the game was going, and it wasn't competitive at all. There
No.
just wasn't. I mean, Arizona State looked like a either a Big Ten or a SEC school compared to Iowa State. So that was just a bludgeoning, and we'll see where they go. I mean, they're going to play. Let's see who they play really quick. They will play the winner of Texas versus Clemson, which will be interesting. You know,
Hey, I think that's a good matchup for them
I
because
do, and I do too, because I think with the other way they had it, I think they were going to have Texas play. They were going to have Boise State play the winner of the Texas whoever, because we knew Texas was probably going to get the fifth seed or Georgia, whoever was going to win the SEC. So I think the way that's why I said it kind of went the way I thought it would go, and I actually am actually kind of pleased with where things will go with this. I think as stupid as the Notre Dame Indiana game looks like, whatever, but it's like they're two in-state. Technically they could be rivals. You know what I mean? You'll have two similar areas battling it out. So I thought that was going to be a good game. But moving over to the SEC championship, that was something that almost partially a Timmy Jimmy Bowl. That I mean, I was just like, does anyone want to win this game? Does anyone want to play and win this game? And I loved Shane Dawson, trolling during the game with
yeah,
the
just woke up from my
190.
nap. What inning are we in? Yeah, or hey, oh wow, nine total yards. That looks great. That's huge offense.
And
So,
this is kind of what I was talking about when we were making the argument about Alabama and Miami and how you can take a statistic and you can flip it on its head and you can depending on what perspective you want to take, you can make an argument. People will sit there and they'll go, well, that just shows the stoutness of SEC defense, and SEC defense, it's like it's so hard to play in, and it's like,
yeah, like that Georgia defense that gave up 40 plus points and 400 yards to Georgia
yeah,
Tech.
nearly
Yep.
500 yards. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And I mean, again, another team experience plays out and wins out. And when Carson Beck went out, I immediately went to FSU. Like I was just like,
Oh, we
oh,
all did.
I was
We
like,
all
it
did.
would be tragic that an SEC school would be left out because their quarterback got injured, you know? But sure enough,
Yeah.
they won out, and now they have no choice, obviously, but to keep them in the playoff because they've got the bye week. What do you think? What do you, where do you think Texas? What's going on with Sark? Do you think it was like he was outcoached by Kirby? Do you think it was a talent gap? Because to me, to lose to Georgia, who, by the way, should be exhausted from, I know it was a week ago, but still, like, you're almost playing another quarter, an extra quarter and a half when you go to 8 overtimes, with your rival. They should have put Georgia out.
I think it was just the moment, and I don't think it's so much Sark's fault as it is just the players not stepping up when they needed to. Because there was a few possessions there towards the end that Quinn Ewers just did not look like the guy. And I know
Yeah.
he struggled with injury a couple times this season, and he's had some performances that look really good, but he's also had some performances that doesn't look so good at all. So I think it was just kind of a Quinn Ewers moment of he doesn't have that that moment against Georgia twice this year. I did like though. I think Mario Cristobal could take a note out of Sark's playbook here when he has interviews in the sidelines for saying, well, I hope they call holding one of those times on Georgia's offense because they're just allowed to do what they want to do. And I love it when a coach actually calls it the way that we're seeing it, because if you're watching guys just
Yeah.
get absolutely manhandled out there, you go, you got to call it at least like once or twice. Like it's not something that if you see over the course of a game and they don't call holding at all on an offense, they're favoring somebody. So I like that he did that. And it's something that I think the SEC seems to get away with a lot, is that they can criticize their officials as much as they like, and they don't really either announce fines or enforce fines as much. Whereas Mario Cristobal says the word official, he's afraid of getting a fine from the ACC office. I think we got guys that could take care of that for you. So please speak your mind and let everybody feel better about you and the program.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if Sark would actually pull the cable and put Arch in, but I feel like Quinn Ewers was doing just enough of a good job to keep himself in the game, and it was like one of those. It was like one of those like damned if I do, damned if I don't moments where he was like, if I pull him, do we go down? Because the game was just so close. I wonder if he struggled with pulling Ewers. I would have pulled Ewers just for maybe a possession or two, just to see where the game chemistry and the player chemistry would have gone. Because at that point, you have Carson Beck out and he's not coming back. He's ruled out. Your defense should be able to stop, especially one of the best defenses in the SEC, let alone the nation, should be able to stop a backup quarterback. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And so and not only that, but ETN, game decision coming in, he's not running at 100%, even though he won the game for them, which was that I know this is such a like trivial and stupid thing, but like the optics of it you can't ignore. But it's like you lose the game in overtime to a quarterback with a busted arm who was ruled out for the rest of the game, and a running back who was questionable leading into the game.
Wearing a Kevlar vest.
Yeah, it's just like
He's like
how.
the injured Christian Bale Batman
Yeah,
wearing like carbon fiber and Kevlar around like his midsection.
section.
And
Yeah,
he goes in there and barrels for
4
5
yards.
yards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just like, it was funny. I was watching the game and I saw Carson Beck come out, so I was like, oh, this will be like a run up the middle, and they'll get stuffed, and then they'll bring the backup back in because he lost his helmet, and then they'll maybe score, or the game will go on. So I didn't even pay attention to that play. Like I was like, there's no way they're gonna score now. Like they're bringing in Carson Beck, and
Right.
the dude's
That's a
literally.
throwaway play.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought. I was like, there's no way they're gonna. And then sure enough, they do it. I was just I didn't even know it. I was in utter shock. I think I was in more shock than the Texas players. I was like, how do you let that happen?
Yeah.
Like,
And
obviously, they're not going to throw it because he can't throw it. That was the other thing too. It was his throwing arm, so there's no chance. It was like a Haynes King thing. It was
yeah.
like it was almost like Texas's like defense took a note from Lance Guidry, and they were just like they just completely like did not recognize that like, oh, like they don't have a quarterback that can throw.
And I don't know what the status of what Georgia's quarterback situation looks like, but if I'm Kirby Smart, I'm putting that back up in a sleep pod for like a month and not letting him see the light of day, because that hit that he had to go out on
Oh
was
my god.
absolutely violent. I
No.
mean, just to watch his facial expression and the way one of his legs, like, kinda, like,
No,
bent
his
back
legs, he
underneath
did
him and
his
go,
legs did the W. He did
"Yeah,
the W pose with his feet where he just went down and his legs went out and he was just like
yeah."
flatlined.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, like, do they have a third stringer that's capable at this point? They don't. That's why they brought Carson Beck in with one arm. But yeah, that's who knows if that kid would have been able to make it back in the game if they don't score on that play. Because they're going to say, oh yeah, well he's had his helmet off, he's got to sit on the sideline and go give that kid a give a kid an evaluation, because I don't know how much was upstairs when he got back up after that hit.
Yeah, he that and I wouldn't even be surprised if they dodged the concussion protocol because that guy looked like he had lights out. Like he was
Oh yeah,
I mean, and if they put him through a concussion protocol, there's no way he passes that because that kid was literally kind of like which we can talk about this for a quick second. Are we still playing football? Because what is up with these targeting calls that are just clean hits? Like there was a flag for one hit that Texas made. That was a clear shoulder hit that they called. Then there was in the Arizona State, Iowa State, like there was a sack that was as clean as you can get, textbook tackle as you can get. That guy was actually disqualified from the game, which means I think he'll miss a half or a quarter in the
yeah,
first play.
he'll miss the half. He'll miss
He'll
the
miss the
first half of
half.
the next game of the college football playoff. Yeah.
That's
So,
a semi because they're going to go to the semis. Remember, or not
yep.
semis, the quarterfinals. They're going to miss
Quarter.
like
Yeah.
that's just insanity. Like we there needs to be an overhaul on this targeting rule. Like, and not only just an overhaul, but it's like, what are we playing? If because if we're not playing, if we're gonna rule these things targetings where people are getting disqualified, and not, I don't mind if you want to disqualify someone for a game, like for that game, but to make them miss an entire next game, especially when the play is so like ticky tack and like wishy washy, you're like, oh, I don't know. But some of them, like the one that Arizona State is dealing with right now, to me that was a very clean hit. That
Yeah,
was there was good.
I was saying, and the tough part too is if you're watching like the way they're wearing their gear now, like there's so much that's still exposed because now the snap pants are going up above the knees,
Knees, yep.
halfway up the quad. So like there's all sorts of hits that definitely need to be outlawed for sure, but you're just making the game more offensively centric. So like defenses just have no way of stopping people anymore. You're kind of you're disarming teams in terms of the ability to make that kind of a hit. It looks so much more outrageous, like, now in terms of what they're calling for penalties, but how are you supposed to stop teams from doing how are you supposed to stop teams from defending? Like, essentially, you're making this flag football.
Yeah, again, you understand what football is when you get into it. It's a violent sport. It's not. No offense, it's not golf. It's not baseball. It's a violent impact like sport, and that's what's going to happen. Now, again, am I asking to bring back the old Sean Taylor hits from the early 2000s? Absolutely not.
No, but
Um,
hey, he knew how to hit clean too.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
he
but
wants to
like
get it he had good timing, but he knew how to hit you form tackle if he wanted you to. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I know what they're referring to when they talk about targeting and why this law was implemented, why this rule was implemented, and everything like that. But it's just like it slows the game down. And I don't mean it just slows the game down where people have to review it. I'm talking about like now defensive players are hesitating to make hits. It's going to change the dynamic of the game. It's just like it's very different than what they're doing with the kickoff. Like I'm cool with the new kickoff rules that they want to do, but the tackling and the wishy ticky tackiness of the targeting is just it's getting obscene and it's absurd, and especially when you're getting into championship games like this, like, and we now have a playoff. It's like, no, man, it's unacceptable. Go ahead.
The scariest part is when it comes to the runner. So when they're, fully being a physical runner and they're starting to lower their head, that's
Yeah,
the worst time when they're starting to go after. Like, obviously, like the call they picked up, so that hit on the Georgia quarterback,
yeah,
that was obviously not targeting because he was a runner. He was
yeah.
lowering his head. He was going at it, but that's where the worst part of that kind of impact comes in because you got two people lowering their heads at each other. Uh, they got to look at targeting more from that sense in terms of if you're going to give this all on the defensive player, there has to be something offensively that needs to counter that in terms of what you're able to do to protect yourself as a player or, not make yourself so violent. I think they have to look into something there that adds a little bit more. You can't just keep penalizing the defense because everything that's been instituted right now, all it does is kill defense.
Yeah,
Or if you want to enforce targeting as as by the book as it is right now, you have to start calling some more penalties against the offense when it comes to holding and other parts of the line of scrimmage
I
because
agree.
that's the reason why they're doing it. They feel like they have to deliver that big hit because that's the only way they're going to get a stop. It's either they're knocking the ball loose, they're forcing a fumble or like a intercept or an incomplete pass, something like that. That's the only way that they're going to make that happen. So if you start calling more offensive penalties, you won't get as many targetings.
Yeah, and moving over to the last game yesterday, the Big Ten. I didn't get to watch a lot of this mainly because I was watching the ACC championship game, but I would flip back and forth. Defense was an option was optional last night. I did not think Penn State was going to be putting up the numbers they did, and that one play from Drew Allard to make it a one possession game at the end where he just got leveled and threw that touchdown. I was like, that was one L of a throw. I mean, that was gutsy. What did you think of the Big Ten game? Did you get to catch any of it?
Yeah, I was flipping back and forth too, and honestly, at one point, I just kept watching the Big Ten championship game towards the end of it. I noticed a couple things. I think it shows you why Boise State was able to play with Oregon for as long as they did and keep that game close because the biggest mismatch that Penn State was exploiting was their running backs going out into pass, into in running passing routes, and the inability for Oregon's defense to defend the running backs kind of feels similar and hits very close to home for us Miami Hurricanes fans having running backs on linebackers on running backs.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing that I noticed, and I wonder how that's going to continue to be exploited through the postseason for anybody who's playing Oregon, because that's the best Penn State's looked all year, and that's a
Yeah,
team that
they
I've
look
been
phenomenal.
low on.
Like I thought the game would go one of two ways, and the way it went was not the way I thought it would go. I thought it would either be a blowout by Oregon, where Oregon's offense would just be too much; they would get ahead by two or three possessions, whether it was like two touchdowns and a field goal or three touchdowns, and then just Penn State's not built to come back like that. Or I thought it would be just a stereotypical Big Ten, low scoring, 10-13 or like 17-10 kind of game. And sure enough, it was neither, which
Yeah.
surprised the hell out of me. But also, like you said, I think it kind of gave some teams some blueprints on how to play Oregon. And it showed Oregon as very human because you have to remember a lot of people, Penn State probably included, did not see themselves probably going into that game. So I couldn't imagine James Franklin and crew drawing up and looking at video, being super prepared. I feel like their preparation was probably very last minute as it can be. You know what I mean? And so for that to occur, again, it's very much like the SMU Clemson thing where I thought SMU's advantage was they knew they were going to play, they were ready to play, and they were going to play. They were going to have a game plan for whoever it was, and I thought the same thing was going to be true for Oregon, where they knew they were going to play and they were going to be playing a team who was like, oh, we're up, okay, cool, let's go, like, and I feel like you can kind of get a sneaky win in that way. Um, but I also did think because I also switched back, especially towards the end of because I wanted to see how that Ten game was going to go. And it did look like Oregon was the more dominant team, though, especially on that offensive line versus Penn State's defensive line. They looked really, really good, and there were gaps and openings, especially on that last drive to basically go into victory formation. Where I was like, okay, if Penn State could even just just hold them this possession, I'm not sure if they can actually win, but if they can, it'll be a great sign for the playoffs. But, Oregon got that last run with Dylan Gabriel. And I was just like, wow, maybe they are good, and they're going to be they're going to be a great team in the playoffs. I don't think it's going to be as like, oh, just deliver them the trophy. They're going to win, but I definitely think they're still the favorite in my books.
Yeah, and this is how little I think of Penn State. They took a knee going into the half where they took a knee from the pistol or from the shotgun. Like they
Hmm.
couldn't even get under center to take a knee.
Yeah,
So, as a Miami fan criticizing other teams and how they take a knee, I know that's really, funny to some
it's
people,
it's
but
poetic.
the fact that you took the knee from the pistol is a little weird to me. So, I don't know how much that team is built to make a playoff run. I mean, granted, look, they're hosting first round Beaver Stadium. SMU has to go into what's probably going to be like, sub-zero weather
Yeah,
in Happy Valley to play
freezing.
that off. I'm super interested to see what like a January game in Beaver Stadium because that's the one thing I think that. Sorry to
Well, it
go
won't be
off
January.
the
It'll be December
conference
20th.
championship. Oh, is it that early? I thought it was all in
Yeah.
Jan. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, no,
Still,
it's
it's the
it's in
latest
two
game
weeks.
that they've
2
ever
weeks.
played.
They get a week off, and then they have a week of prep, and then that's the game. December 20th is the
The,
first home game. Still cold. Don't get me wrong. It's still
the
going to be
latest
freezing.
you've ever seen games in these markets. So it's like,
Yeah.
what is that going to look like? I think Penn State's one of the places too where they have artificial turf now. So I don't think it's going to be,
No, yeah,
you
they
have to worry
do.
about having a frozen tundra out there. But at the same time, I wonder if part of their like large Beaver Stadium improvements was putting heaters underneath the
The
artificial
turf.
turf to try to keep it going.
Yeah, we'll see. I wanted to before we move into our picks and where we think the playoffs will go. I wanted to ask this question because I had this feeling at the end of each championship when I watched it. Not so much the G5, the ACC, or the Big 12, but especially the ACC and the Big 10, which is funny because those are the two power schools. Um, do championship games matter anymore?
There's been a lot of talk about that. Given the fact that both teams at play should automatically get in, does it matter? Not really. I mean, it matters
Right?
in terms of getting a better seed and to, skip that first round of playoffs, but you don't need to play the championship game to do that. You could just say if you're the number 1 in the conference table, that gives you the opportunity to have that first seed. So yeah, I don't in a way, even by protecting the championship games by putting SMU in, you've already still kind of made an argument to say championship games don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. I know we're not going to go into it now, and probably it's something for the offseason to talk about what we would do to fix kind of what that playoff format looks like and how you can like do your conference scheduling. I think of like UEFA Champions League
Oh,
in
yeah.
terms of like you just give people spots because the way they're doing it now, it's so stupid. It's so incredibly stupid from the fact of like, yeah, the championship game doesn't matter. You're not even seeing in most cases very good football at the championship game level already as it is. Because, like you
Yeah.
said, the SEC was a Timmy Jimmy fight.
Yeah.
The ACC was a typical ACC kind of game. It just felt weird and
Yeah.
wonky, and it
It
won kind of
was.
weird and wonky.
And like like same thing with the Big
Was
Ten.
it was an annihilation?
Yeah, and the Big Ten was weird too because, and I say the Big Ten and the SEC just because of the bias towards both those conferences, because we both knew and everyone knew that both teams would be making it into the playoff, win or lose. So I'm like, what are the stakes? And even with Georgia winning the SEC in years past, winning the SEC felt like it mattered, and like I'm watching Georgia like hoist the trophy and them rush the field, and I'm just like, for what though? You guys got to buy. Congratulations, but now you really got to play. Now, now we can finally play the game, according to I think
Kirby was
South
more
Park.
happy. He was happier to rib Greg Sankey, their commissioner, than talk about like winning. It's like they made us go on the road and play everybody this year. Newsflash: they played 8 games in the state of Georgia.
Yeah. Well, that is textbook Kirby. Kirby will literally play victim. He'll whatever it is, he uses it for his advantage to make a talking point and to fire his team up and to create a narrative around his program that makes him either look better or make it look like the odds were stacked against him. And it's great. It's a Nick Saban tactic. Nick Saban used to do the same thing. He just used to call it rat poison. You know what I mean? So it's
Hey,
it's
Jimmy Johnson used to do that too.
yeah, so it's one of the oldest tricks in the book, and I get it. But yeah, watching these championship games, like other than in the ACC, the reason why I didn't include it in there is because like seeing Clemson win to me, it was almost a guarantee then that we were going to get two teams in. It wasn't
Yep.
something I really wanted, but it was something that I was like, okay, well, I mean, this is the consolation is getting two teams in, and that makes me happy. And even if we can disrupt one, like either the SEC or the Big Ten, like whoever we disrupt in that game, whether it's Texas or Penn State, I would love to see an ACC team do that. You know what I mean? And who knows, like both teams could win, and that would be like, okay, well, where are you guys at now?
Yeah.
Which, speaking of which, let's actually get into your predictions. Let's start off with the 8-9 because I think that is the most tumultuous slash competitive game we're going to see on paper between Tennessee and Ohio State. Who do you have winning that?
Ohio State. And I only say that because like look, Tennessee they limped their way in, and if you look at their quality wins versus losses. It's the SEC. Yeah, they're going to make it seem like, oh, well, they beat Alabama. Yeah, so did every other 6-6 team in the conference that year. I mean, there was an argument at one point that Tennessee wasn't even the best team in the state of Tennessee that year,
Yeah.
that season. So I'm just I don't really believe in them, and I think Ohio State has so much. Like you talked about Kirby Smart being a guy that like loves to say the world is against us at all times. Last time Ohio State played in the horseshoe, people were booing. They were trying to fire Ryan Day. They were trying to get all these things going on because they lost to Michigan. They're going to lose 2 straight games in the shoe.
No, no way.
Yeah.
I don't think Ryan Day could survive. I think he would just immediately just leave and pack up. He wouldn't even pack up his office. He'd be like, "It just burn it all."
Yeah,
And I think,
exactly. I'll just toss a match and you feel free. Like have fun with it. Get Lou Holtz to put out the fire for us.
and I'm with you. So we'll both have Ohio State versus Oregon in the quarterfinals. Let's move over to Clemson and Texas. Who do you have winning that game?
Oh, this is tough. I look as decent as Clemson looked in the ACC championship game. I still just don't think they're that team. I hate to say that Texas is probably going to pull this one out. Let's say it's closer than the experts think, but like the thing that disappointed me about Clemson was that they looked like they were going to run over SMU, and that they went up 21-0. It
Right?
looked like nothing was going to stop them, and I thought, okay, well there you go. That should be your Clemson. Finally looks like Clemson again. I don't think they can. I don't think they can do that, especially on the road. I mean, look, they already had enough trouble winning at home against lost South Carolina, lost to Louisville. Texas is going to be the most physical team they probably play all year, and it's the one team that I thought was deserving from the SEC to get in. So I think that's going to be a bad look for the ACC, even though it shouldn't have been.
All right, moving. I'm actually gonna go with Clemson on this one.
I'm
Um,
happy for. I would not be sad at all if that happened.
I'm not doing this to be an ACC homer, but I just feel like again talking about that momentum. I think Texas coming off a loss, even though they should be winning. I think again experience wins out, and Texas the last time they were in the playoffs they lost to Washington. I think they're going to lose to. I think just Dabo. I don't know what it is. I just am a firm believer that usually experience in situations where you're not sure is the safer bet. So I'm going to go actually Clemson on that one.
You just don't like Texas's locker room videos. That's all it
I
is. You
Yeah,
don't like
that's
them
true
doing
too.
their
I
little
mean that. Yeah,
dances and
that
like
was.
dropping it like it's hot. Yeah, you don't like any of that. And
Yeah.
and hey, like Dabo says already, there's going to be a point where you have to figure out if God is on Notre Dame's side or on Clemson's side. Because if you ask Dabo Swinney and Cade Klubnik, God is with Clemson now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which I mean, as a believer, it was funny. Like I was telling Riza last night because we were watching the thing, and Dabo was thanking Jesus. Which I listen before I gave my life to Christ. I would always look at that and be like, man, these guys really love Jesus. Don't understand why, but like now as a believer, I'm like, I get why you're saying it, and I understand your heart. But please, especially the coach from Boise State with it, where he basically gave his altar call, and I was just like, it's a little weird, bro. I'm like, I'm not sure if this is the venue to be evangelizing. I get it. I'm with you. I love Jesus just as much as you do, but I'm like, it's a little too much. It's just for this venue. I'm like, I get it. Like you can. There's 1,000 other venues, but I'm like, this. It's like people are asking you about a
Yeah.
game. They're not asking you to do an altar call. And again, no knock on them. I love the fact they did it. You know,
I just
props to the state.
I, I just want to make sure that Jesus wasn't in that earpiece after the first 15 seconds because they're not allowed after a certain point. If that's an unfair advantage, they got to look into that. So,
Yeah, they gotta put the cross on the helmet to let them know they have a direct link to heaven to get that favor. Because favor ain't fair, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you something. Favor is not fair. But moving over, speaking of God and Jesus, we've got touchdown Jesus versus the Hoosiers of Indiana. Who do you have in this Indiana rivalry?
this is going into South Bend, and I will tell you, I'm going to take Indiana because
I'm
I think
thinking,
that coach is so angry.
yo, the Fighting Sigs.
The Sigs, he's so angry. And they play a look, as much as they haven't really had their run of the mill in the Big Ten in terms of like they didn't really play the top guys. Uh they still they laid an egg against Ohio State. I don't think they'll do that again. And let's not forget, Notre Dame doesn't exactly play the toughest schedule in the country either. I mean, their one loss is to Northern Illinois, who absolutely out physicaled them. Like what Louisville did to Clemson is what Northern Illinois did to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take Indiana because I think that's such a big deal in that state. And I think they're just so angry that
And
they
think
want to
about it.
show that they deserve to be there.
It's not that it will obviously be home field advantage, but it's not like they've got Boise State coming to Indiana to play in North and South Bend. You know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
like it's not that they're not that far off. So I don't know how much of a home field advantage Notre Dame will have. I'm actually gonna go. Sadly, though, I love the Fighting Sigs. I'm gonna go with Notre Dame. I just again, I'm gonna go. My it's gonna be my mantra. Experience will win out. I feel
You're
like Notre
just a
Dame.
big fan of touchdown Jesus and
I
watching
said
them get
Lou
that
Holtz.
ball down the field.
I love myself some Lou Holtz. I miss that guy. He's so crazy.
I
No,
just want to make sure it doesn't rain during that game. That's just me up in the box talking to everyone.
the best part is casuals will have no idea what we're talking about, but the real ones, they know what's up. They
That's
know.
all that matters. Marcus Freeman's gonna finally get them over to hump in the playoff.
Can you believe that too? By the way, Marcus Freeman made it to the playoffs before Brian Kelly. What a time!
I'm okay
Brian
with that.
Kelly. I guarantee you, if you go to LSU right now between Underwood going to Michigan and this, there's no way that guy's not trashed his office at this point. Moving over to Happy Valley, we've got SMU versus Penn State. Who do you have? Do you got the Pony Express or you got them Nittany Lions?
Uh, Look, as much as I want to see the ACC get one of these wins, I think it's so tough to go. I don't know what the weather's going to look like. I don't know if they got heaters under that field. Um, I kind of think it's going to be Penn State. I hate to say that
Me
just
too.
because they have a halfway decent defense. And look, we already saw that size differential in terms of how they played against Clemson. Yeah, I'm sadly taking Penn State.
Should we keep it going or should we save this for the first week of the playoffs?
I'm happy to keep going
Let's
because
keep it going.
we could fix it as we go on anyway. Like if we get one of those picks wrong, we could revisit it and say, well, do we think that this matchup looks better or worse after the
Yeah, because
first week?
I haven't looked at any of the stats. I haven't looked at things on papers. I don't know what the matchups look like. So I'm literally just going by my eye test and what
Yeah,
I think will go. So we've got Ohio State versus Oregon. You've got Texas versus Arizona State. I have Clemson versus Arizona State. You have Indiana versus Georgia. I have Notre Dame versus Georgia. And then we both have Penn State versus Boise State. Let's start off with the Ohio State Oregon rematch. Who do you have in
Oregon.
that?
It's
Oregon?
Oregon. We talked about this all
Yeah.
throughout the season so far. I know it's like you're playing people multiple times, but now that the way I had this going in our first, long prediction was that Ohio State would get the better of them, but that would have been after a third meeting.
Yeah.
Now that it's twice, I think it's still Oregon.
Yeah, I'm going Oregon as well. All right, so you have Texas versus Arizona State. Who do you have winning the Texas versus Arizona State game?
um, I'm rolling with Scatterboo. I'm
Scat.
going to take Arizona
Ooh.
State in the upset. I'm going to take Arizona State in an upset only because there's something about that team, man. There's something about them that they just line up to play and they don't care who's on the other side.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I have Clemson playing Arizona State in the quarterfinals, and I'm again. This is my mantra for right now, just because
Experience.
experience wins out, and I think Scadaboo's great, and I think he's good. But just seeing the way that Clemson played Bradshaw. Is that his name?
Brashard
The
Smith, the running back.
Brashard Smith, the running back for SMU, who's had a stellar year. Um, I think they can shut down Scatterboo, even though he's my boy.
Scatterboo is the size of three Brashard Smiths.
Yeah, but still, it's not a to me. It's not about size is a big thing. Don't get me
I
wrong.
know.
Size is absolutely a big thing. But I think there are also intangibles of breaking tackles, being in open space, cuts, and speed. And so when you factor those things in, when you look at their attributes, I feel like they're pretty even because at the end of the day, you can send what's his name? Oh, what's his name? Smith, the running back for SMU.
Brashard Smith, yeah.
Brashard Smith, you can send him out as a wide receiver. You can send him out in the flat and he's going to catch it like a wide receiver. Like it's not like you're like, okay, I hope you have the hands to catch this like some running backs. Like he's going to catch it. So as in terms of a weapon, I feel like he's more well-rounded. Whereas Scatterboo is like a hammer. He's like a war hammer. And
Yeah.
you have like Brashard Smith, who's more like a katana. Like he'll just cut through and he'll make it. He's not super powerful, but he's very precise and he'll cut through. So
The matchup
I'm
that scares me there really is gonna be Wesco Jr., the wide receiver for Clemson, and Jake
mhm,
Brenningstool, their tight end, because in terms of pass coverage, like, even though Arizona State got the better of Iowa State, I don't think they could do that against Clemson in that same regard, so that might be a
yeah.
little difficult for them there.
And again, utter the phrase again. Experience wins out. I feel like Dabo has been here before. He knows what to do. He's won a national championship. He's won in a playoff,
They commit 0
quarterfinal.
penalties.
And again, yes, it was ACC officiating, which is a Timmy Jimmy team as it is, but it still says a lot that hey, you're able to get through without a flag hitting without any laundry hitting the floor. You're pretty good. So now you have Indiana versus Georgia. Who's winning that?
Georgia.
Georgia.
I
Yeah.
Georgia.
I'm gonna say too, like I have Notre Dame going and beating Indiana. I think Georgia's I mean, we've seen this before though. This is a rematch from what was that, the 2016 CFP? I think
And
that
you
was.
know what happened in that game over there? It was not a good look.
No, that was a bludgeoning itself. So yeah, I think Georgia, even with I mean, we'll have to figure out. I haven't heard anything today. Have you heard anything about Carson Beck's injury? What happened? No, so I haven't heard
Haven't really
either.
paid attention much.
Yeah, so if I think he'll be back. So with Carson Beck, I still pick Georgia over Notre Dame or Indiana. So we both have Penn State playing the Broncos. Who do you have there?
Penn State. This was actually, if you go back to our early show, I
Hmm.
had Penn State going to Boise to play the Broncos in the first round. Back when we were still looking at those results with Miami still in playoff contention. I had Penn State winning then. I still have them kind of winning now because again, as much as look, they took a similar note out of Boise State's offense to make Oregon look mortal. I just don't believe in that group of five. Like as much as Boise State has had some really fun stories in the past, I just don't believe that part of the country, that team, it looks like a high school team. Ashton Genty's a great talent.
Yeah,
I
they're
just
just
don't
not
know
big
how
enough.
that line.
And I would say
Yeah,
this too. I thought Penn State played Oregon really well, and Oregon beat Boise State. So to me, it's like again, I know the transitive property hasn't been 100% accurate this season because everyone's beaten everyone, but I still think you can use a litmus test in this and say they're comparable, maybe not exactly, but close enough. And it'd be the same thing if Ohio State played the Broncos. I would still pick Ohio State over the Broncos. Speaking of
okay.
Ohio State, they're out of it. So we have Oregon playing for you. You have Texas. I have Clemson. Who do you have in a Texas versus Oregon?
Oregon.
Oregon. So you have Oregon going to the finals
Right.
on their
Yep.
side. Okay. Uh I will say the same. I will pick Oregon over Clemson. I think Oregon's just gonna. I think they're a team that's on fire. They're clicking, and you can't stop that until someone proves me wrong. Proves us wrong. I think it is. Next, we have Georgia versus Penn State in the semis. Who do you have there?
This one's really interesting because after what Penn State did to Oregon, I think that matchup right now favors Penn State because they could do the same thing to Georgia. Like they
That's
have
true.
a pretty decent team. I think we'll know like what does that quarterback situation look like at that point.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think we can have a Big Ten championship game 2.0. So I'm going to say it's Georgia, but I think Penn State gives them a better. Penn State's one of those teams that I think they look not great and not impressive all season, but they have such an easier run through the playoffs that they
Yeah.
just look better right now.
Right.
So I'm giving it to Georgia.
Yeah. Well, you already know where I'm going with this. It's the phrase of the night.
Experience wins out, and James
Experience.
Franklin is coaching Penn State.
That was my second. I was gonna go there, and you stole it from me. That was my next line. I was like,
Sorry.
and James Franklin's going to
Sorry.
James Franklin. At the end of the day, when it comes to these big games, James Franklin's gonna do what James Franklin does best and choke. And so yeah, I have Georgia and Oregon going. I think we both have Georgia and Oregon going. Who do you have winning the national championship?
Okay, so let me preface this right now because there are many things I dislike. The SEC being one of them, hate it with an absolute passion. I think my pick doesn't necessarily say that one conference is superior to another, the talent is more superior to another. I just cannot stand the fact that Oregon has this beautiful trophy case in Eugene that has 0 national titles, and when they get there, they usually don't follow through anyway. I mean, they lost to Cam Newton in Auburn that one time, and it
Yeah.
was one of those where I'm like, "Is this team really going to ever win the big one?"
Right.
They have to stumble at some point this season because I don't think in this day of college football you can just run the table. I hate to say that Georgia's going to win, but just from the absolute bias that exists in college football right now, even though this is the ideal Big Ten versus SEC matchup that everyone wants, the SEC always finds a way to finagle and weasel their way into a win, and I don't think it's any different with Georgia, regardless of who their quarterback is. I think they'll somehow find a way to get ETN like 300 rushing yards against Oregon and say, "Is this that the SEC defense really doing its job?" When it's just a bunch of holds down the way. Sarkisian will be watching the game, and Sark will be saying, "That's holding two, and that's holding two," and he'll be calling Dan Lanning saying, "Hey, mention to the sideline reporters that they're holding." So I'm taking Georgia, sadly.
You know what I'm gonna say? Where am I gonna go with it?
Experience wins out.
Not so fast, my friend. Not so fast. I actually have Oregon winning. I am a firm believer that when you're clicking, and it's when you have weapons, you have weapons. And I feel like when you look at the two teams, if you still had McConkey or who was the other Bowers on Georgia,
Yeah,
I would
Brock
say
Bowers.
Brock Bowers. I'd be like, yeah, absolutely, Georgia clean. They've got this. But because Georgia is so Jekyll and Hyde with their offense, sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's not, and we've seen what happens like in the Ole Miss game, where they can literally poop the bed. I just haven't seen a reason to pick against Oregon. Has Oregon shown up weak at times? Yes, but I think the when you look at the bracket, I feel like Georgia's going to have the harder game because they're going to have to play Notre Dame, then they're going to have to play Penn State, which I feel like is a lot harder than you having to play, in my opinion, what's going to be a weaker either Clemson or Texas, and then an Ohio State that's struggling with their O line. So and you've already played them, you've already beaten them. So to me, I feel like the easier road is Oregon, and they've got all the confidence in the world. They'll probably go into that game with the Heisman quarterback and Dylan Gabriel, and he's putting up monster yards. There's just to me the narrative, and let's just use tinfoil hat theory. There is a narrative because you and I were talking about before this went on. We were talking about how it's so weird that the ACC was, promoting the game the Tuesday before the Syracuse game with UM as SMU versus Clemson. How do they know Clemson was going to make it in there? Not to say that they erased a 21-point deficit, like you said earlier, but
Pop Tart Bowl committee members walking on the sidelines of the Miami, game against was that Wake Forest last game of the
it's
year?
a
Yeah,
little too sus. It's a little
staring
too
at that
sus.
little Pop Tart pouch on the blazer. I went, "We're not playing in that game. I don't know what you're doing here." And Wake Forest, lo and behold, we're playing in that game. I
Yeah.
will get toaster strudel to watch the game because I just don't care for Pop Tarts right now.
Yeah, I probably won't even watch it. I love UM, and I'm just kidding. I'm going to watch it because we have this show. But
Gonna
yeah,
Opus Day myself and watch it.
I have Oregon winning the national championship. We will revisit these picks maybe next week or probably the week after in 2 weeks when we have our preview for the week one games for the playoffs. Thank you guys for making it to the end of this video. Thank you, Rudy, as always, for joining us last minute to do this special selection Sunday. We will see everyone next time we see you. As always, be good. Win the weekend. Well, now win the week. And as always, go Canes.
Go Canes and Army Navy picks next show.
Oh, we can do that. That's true. Yeah,
Next
that's
show,
true.
yeah.
Let's go.
You can
Beat
tell.
Army, beat Navy. Let's go. We'll see you guys next time.